The searing Mediterranean sun beat down on Private Paddy McCrystal as he crouched behind a crumbling stone wall, his rifle clutched tightly to his chest. The acrid smell of cordite permeated the air, mixed with the metallic tang of blood and the salty sea breeze. It was November 16th, 1943, and for 5 relentless days, the tiny Greek island of Leros had been engulfed in a maelstrom of violence. Suddenly, the sky darkened as waves of Luftwaffe bombers roared overhead. The earth shook violently as explosions erupted all around, showering McCrystal with debris. Through the choking dust and smoke, he squinted at the horizon, his blood running cold at the sight before him. Hundreds of dark specks filled the air, German paratroopers descending like a swarm of locusts. The 21-year-old soldier's mind raced almost in a panic after days of ceaseless attacks and sleep deprivation. Their depleted British garrison was already exhausted from days of constant bombardment. Now they faced over 1,500 fresh German soldiers dropping from the skies, joining the thousands more who had already landed in a brutal amphibious attack. As the staccato of gunfire mounted around him, McCrystal gripped his rifle tighter. The odds seemed insurmountable. How could they hold out without air support and dwindling supplies? He watched in dread as more parachutes blossomed overhead. British gunners took the paratroopers out by the dozens, but they kept coming. McCrystal knew the stakes were enormous. Leros was the key to controlling the Aegean Sea. If it fell, the Allies would lose their foothold in the region, leaving Turkey exposed and potentially pushing them into the Axis camp. It would dash Churchill's hopes of striking at Hitler's soft underbelly through the Balkans and give the Germans a clear path to the oil-rich Middle East. As another explosion rocked the earth, McCrystal steeled himself. The fate of the war might hinge on their ability to hold this tiny island. The battle for Leros was about to reach its bloody climax. As the autumn of 1943 descended upon Europe, the once mighty German war machine became increasingly precarious. The Third Reich, which had seemed unstoppable just 2 years earlier, was now reeling from a series of crushing defeats that spanned the breadth of the continent and beyond. On the Eastern Front, the tide had decisively turned against Hitler's forces. The disastrous defeat at Stalingrad in February 1943 had cost the Germans an entire army, with over 800,000 Axis soldiers lost, wounded, or captured. This catastrophe was followed by another significant setback at Kursk in July and August, where the Germans lost around 200,000 men and 760 tanks in what would be their last major offensive on the Eastern Front. As winter approached, the Red Army was pushing westward with increasing momentum, liberating vast swathes of Soviet territory. In North Africa, the once vaunted Afrika Korps had met its ignominious end. May 1943 saw the surrender of over 230,000 Axis troops in Tunisia, effectively ending the war in Africa. This defeat cost Germany a significant portion of its experienced forces and opened the door for Allied operations in southern Europe. Indeed, the vulnerability of Hitler's Fortress Europe had been exposed with the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943. Operation Husky involved over 150,000 Allied troops and resulted in the collapse of Mussolini's fascist government. By September, the Allies had landed on the Italian mainland. Rome's capitulation on September 8th dealt another severe blow to German prestige and strategy. These successive defeats had taken a heavy toll on German resources and manpower. The Wehrmacht, once the most feared fighting force in Europe, was now struggling to replace its losses. By late 1943, Germany was scraping the bottom of its manpower barrel, drafting ever younger recruits and older men into service. The Luftwaffe, which had once dominated the skies over Europe, was now hard-pressed to defend German airspace against increasingly frequent Allied bombing raids. Moreover, the German war economy was under immense strain. The loss of resource-rich territories, coupled with the intensifying Allied strategic bombing campaign, severely hampering industrial production. Critical shortages of fuel, rubber, and other essential materials were beginning to affect military operations on all fronts. Amid the decline and desperation, the German High Command desperately needed a significant victory, not just for strategic purposes, but to boost morale at home and among the troops. The string of defeats had eroded the myth of German invincibility, and Hitler was keenly aware of the psychological impact this could have on the German people's will to continue the fight. Against this backdrop of waning power and mounting desperation, the small Greek island of Leros suddenly assumed an importance far beyond its size. In this remote corner of the Aegean, the Germans saw an opportunity to reverse their fortunes, if only temporarily. A victory in Leros could disrupt Allied plans in the Mediterranean, potentially sway Turkey away from the Allies, and provide a much-needed morale boost for the beleaguered Reich. The Allies were riding a wave of unstoppable success as German fortunes waned. The tide of war had shifted dramatically in their favor throughout 1943, with victory following victory across multiple theaters of operation. In North Africa, the Allies had decisively defeated the Axis powers. The Second Battle of El Alamein in late 1942 marked the turning point. British forces under General Montgomery pushed Rommel's Afrika Korps westward. By May 1943, the combined efforts of British, American, and Free French forces had expelled the Axis from North Africa entirely, capturing over 230,000 German and Italian troops in Tunisia. This success was swiftly followed by the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. Operation Husky involved over 150,000 Allied troops and captured the island in just 38 days. The success of this operation led directly to the fall of Mussolini's fascist government and paved the way for the invasion of mainland Italy. On September 3, 1943, Allied forces landed on the Italian mainland in Operation Avalanche. Just 5 days later, on September 8, Italy surrendered to the Allies. This momentous event opened up new strategic possibilities in the Mediterranean theater, including the potential to seize control of the Dodecanese Islands, of which Leros was a part. Leros held immense strategic importance for the Allies. Its deep-water port at Laki, Portolago, made it an ideal naval base, while its airfields could provide vital air support for operations in the eastern Mediterranean. Control of Leros would give the Allies a foothold in the Aegean Sea, threatening German positions in Greece and the Balkans. Moreover, it could potentially sway Turkey, still neutral, towards joining the Allied cause. The opportunity to seize Leros came with Italy's surrender. The island had been under Italian occupation since 1912 and was heavily fortified. When Italy capitulated, the British moved quickly to secure the island. On September 15, 1943, British forces landed on Leros, welcomed by the Italian garrison of about 8,320 men under Rear Admiral Luigi Mascherpa, who chose to side with the Allies. However, this initial success bred a dangerous overconfidence among Allied commanders. They underestimated both the strategic value Hitler placed on the island and the resources Germany was willing to commit to its defense. The Allied forces on Leros, numbering around 3,000 British troops of the 234th Infantry Brigade and Long-Range Desert Group, alongside the Italian garrison, believed they could hold the island against any German assault. This confidence was bolstered by the island's considerable defenses. Leros boasted 13 coastal batteries with a total of 44 guns, ranging from 76mm to 152mm, and 12 anti-aircraft batteries. The terrain was rugged and seemingly favorable to the defenders. Allied commanders, including Brigadier Robert Tilney, who took command on November 5th, believed these factors would be sufficient to repel any German attack. Yet, they failed to account for critical weaknesses in their position. The Allied forces lacked air support, with the nearest RAF bases in Cyprus and the Middle East too far away to provide adequate cover. They also underestimated the German ability to rapidly concentrate forces for the assault, including the elite Brandenburg Division paratroopers. As November 1943 dawned, the stage was set for a clash that would test Allied overconfidence against German desperation. The battle for Leros was about to begin, and its outcome would shake Allied assumptions about their dominance in the Mediterranean theater. The German assault on Leros, codenamed Operation Leopard, was meticulously planned under the command of General Lieutenant Friedrich Wilhelm Müller. The operation would combine amphibious landings with an audacious airborne assault, leveraging the Luftwaffe's local air superiority. Brigadier Robert Tilney commanded the British forces on the Allied side, while Rear Admiral Luigi Maescherpa led the Italian garrison. The defenders were spread thin across the island's rugged terrain, with key positions on the coastline and strategic heights. The battle commenced on November 12, 1943, at 4:30 a.m. Under the cover of darkness, German landing craft approached the island from multiple directions. The initial landings targeted Palma Bay and Pasta di Sopra on the northeast coast. Despite being spotted by British motor torpedo boats and the Italian Maes 555 around 3 a.m., communication issues delayed the Allied response, allowing the Germans to establish beachheads. As dawn broke, the situation became clear. The Italian batteries Ducci and San Giorgio opened fire, their deafening roar shattering the early morning calm. Shells whistled overhead, exploding in geysers of seawater among the approaching German vessels. At Pandley Bay, the Italian Lago battery engaged the landing forces, while the Royal Irish Fusiliers fiercely contested the German advance near Leros town. Men on both sides screamed in pain and fear as bullets whizzed past and mortars exploded, showering combatants with razor-sharp shrapnel. The rocky terrain of Leros, once a peaceful Mediterranean paradise, was quickly transformed into a hellscape of violence and destruction. At 1:27 p.m., the battle took a dramatic turn. The sky darkened as approximately 500 to 600 paratroopers from the elite Brandenburg Division descended on Mount Rachi. Corporal Vic Kenchington, watching from his position, later recalled the terrifying sight. Quote, "It looked as if hundreds of parachutists had landed around the ridge area. Many were drifting down into the bay or the countryside which lay beyond it." The paratroopers faced a hail of gunfire as they descended, manning a Vickers machine gun as it happened. Captain Clifford Clark described the grim scene. Quote, "It was almost an admiration to see this thing, and somehow felt terribly tense, and so you started to fire at them as they were coming down, as you were taught to do." Barely half the paratroopers made it to the ground alive. Despite heavy losses, the airborne assault succeeded in its primary objective of dividing the Allied forces. The island was effectively split in two. The fighting was intense and often hand-to-hand. Italian gunners fought desperately at the Sciano battery on Mount Cledo as German troops swarmed their position. The air was filled with the cries of the wounded, the sharp crack of rifle fire, and the dull thud of grenade explosions. The Largo battery, commanded by Sublieutenant Corrado Spagnuolo, became a focal point of the battle. Spagnuolo and his men, reinforced by an Italian Navy platoon, fought bravely until Spagnuolo fell in action, his body torn apart by a German mortar round. As night fell on the first day of battle, exhausted men on both sides huddled in makeshift shelters or foxholes, the air still heavy with smoke and the moans of the wounded. The Germans had achieved their initial objectives, but the Allied forces, though battered, were far from defeated. The rugged terrain of Leros still offered defensive advantages, and pockets of resistance remained strong. As reinforcements arrived for both sides over the next few days, the intensity of the fighting would only increase, testing the limits of endurance for the men locked in this brutal struggle for control of Leros. As the battle for Leros entered its third day, the tide began to turn inexorably in Germany's favor. The Luftwaffe's dominance of the skies proved decisive, with waves of Stuka dive bombers screaming down on Allied positions, shattering nerves and breaking defensive lines. The constant bombardment took a heavy toll on the defenders physically and psychologically. Private Paddy McCrystal's eyes, sunken from lack of sleep, later recalled the relentless assault. Quote, "Lucky if you got a day's rest. I didn't get any sleep for a month in Leros." The continuous bombing had pushed many to their breaking point, with cases of battle neurosis becoming increasingly common. Many soldiers, their minds shattered by the constant explosions, had to be evacuated, further depleting the already strained Allied forces. Despite the overwhelming odds, pockets of fierce resistance remained. On November 14th, two King's Own Regiment companies launched a desperate counterattack to recapture part of Apatiki. Lieutenant Colonel Maurice French led the charge, rallying his men with a rousing cry as they pushed forward through a hail of German fire. The attack initially succeeded, driving the Germans back and capturing over 230 prisoners. However, the victory was short-lived, and Colonel French paid the ultimate price, cut down by enemy fire as he directed his troops. The Germans, meanwhile, demonstrated remarkable tactical flexibility. When their initial landings were repulsed at Gorna Bay, they quickly regrouped and tried again, learning from their mistakes. Corporal Vic Kenchington observed their persistence. Quote, "The first lot tried to come in at Gorna Bay and got a terrible beating. An hour later, they came back." The Allies, by contrast, made critical errors that cost them dearly. Brigadier Tilney's decision to focus on a forward defense of the coastline, rather than securing the high ground of the island's interior as originally planned, left the British forces spread too thin and vulnerable to being cut off from each other. On November 15th, the situation became dire for the defenders. The Germans landed an estimated 1,000 fresh troops and artillery during the night, tipping the balance decisively in their favor. By evening, Leros was effectively cleaved in two, with Allied forces isolated and unable to support each other. The final day of the battle, November 16th, dawned with a sense of impending doom for the defenders. German forces pressed their advantage relentlessly. The town of Leros fell, and German troops began assaulting the castle, the last major stronghold. In a final act of defiance, Italian Navy personnel continued to defend the castle, even after the British platoon commander had ordered its abandonment. As German forces closed in on his headquarters, Brigadier Tilney finally accepted the inevitable. At 5:30 in the evening, he made the painful decision to surrender. Rear Admiral Mashapa, commanding the Italian forces, held out for a few more hours before capitulating at 10 in the evening. The battle had exacted a terrible toll. Jack Hart, a Royal Irish Fusilier, described the aftermath. Quote, As we marched along somewhere in the vicinity of Mount Apatici, the sight of dozens of Allied and German soldiers lying on the road and hillside was a stark reminder of the ferocity of the battle. The fall of Leros on November 16, 1943, sent shockwaves through the Allied High Command. What had begun as an opportunistic grab for strategic territory in the wake of Italy's surrender had ended in a humiliating defeat. The battle's outcome would have far-reaching consequences for both Axis and Allied operations in the Mediterranean theater. The human cost of the battle was staggering. The Allies suffered heavily, with over 3,200 British and 5,350 Italian soldiers taken prisoner. Hundreds more lay lifeless or wounded on the rocky slopes of Leros. The Germans, while victorious, had not emerged unscathed. They had lost an estimated 520 men and 1,800 wounded, with many more injured in the perilous parachute drops. The massive triumph provided a much-needed morale boost for the Axis powers after months of setbacks. Hitler himself celebrated the triumph, seeing it as proof that German arms could still prevail against the odds. The success of Operation Leopard briefly rekindled the fading myth of German military invincibility, bolstering morale on other fronts. Conversely, the defeat was a bitter pill for the Allies to swallow. Churchill, who had championed the Dodecanese campaign, was particularly stung by the loss. In a message to Anthony Eden on November 21st, he wrote, quote, "No attempts should be made to minimize the poignancy of the loss of the Dodecanese, which we had a chance of getting so easily and at so little cost, and which we now lost after heavy expenditure." The strategic implications were significant. The fall of Leros, followed swiftly by the capture of Samos and other smaller islands, consolidated German control over the Aegean. This denied the Allies a potential springboard for operations against German-occupied Greece and the Balkans. Moreover, it secured the Axis southern flank and safeguarded vital shipping lanes to the Black Sea. The defeat also had diplomatic repercussions. Turkey, which the Allies had hoped to sway to their cause, remained firmly neutral in the face of demonstrated German strength in the region. The opportunity to potentially knock Turkey into the war and open a new front against Germany had been lost. For the Germans, the victory brought a respite from the relentless string of defeats they had suffered throughout 1943. It allowed them to shore up their defenses in the eastern Mediterranean and freed up resources for other fronts. However, in the grand strategic picture, it was but a temporary setback for the Allies, who were advancing inexorably on other fronts. Both sides drew lessons from the battle. The Germans had demonstrated the effectiveness of combined amphibious and airborne operations, a tactic they would attempt to replicate elsewhere. The success of the Brandenburgers, in particular, highlighted the value of elite, specially trained units in seizing key objectives. For the Allies, the Battle of Leros was a harsh lesson. It underscored the critical importance of air superiority in modern warfare. The lack of effective air cover had left the defenders vulnerable to constant Luftwaffe attacks, a mistake they would not repeat in future operations. The battle also highlighted the need for better coordination between land, sea, and air forces. Perhaps most importantly, it served as a cautionary tale against overconfidence and the dangers of stretching resources too thin. The Allies had underestimated German capabilities and resolve, a mistake they could ill afford as they prepared for the massive amphibious operations that would define the final stages of the war in Europe. As the dust settled on the battered island of Leros, both sides knew that the war was far from won while this battle was over. The lessons learned in this remote corner of the Aegean would shape strategies and tactics in the crucial months to come.